What's going on, guys? Rodrigo here with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Today we sat down with Shane Mccarthy, who's running for Asheville City Council, and we talked about all the topics that we think are relevant to real estate here in the area. So we touched on short-term rentals, affordable housing, and transportation particularly. Shane also just shared some of the other platforms he's running on as far as the environment and tourism here in the Asheville area. So check this episode out, and most importantly, don't forget to get out and vote. See you guys all next week. Well, welcome to the podcast, Shane. Super happy to have you here. Thanks for taking the time. For those of you who don't know you, it'd be great if you don't mind just giving a quick introduction and also tie that into why you wanted to run for council.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. It's great to be here. So I'm Shane McCarthy. I'm running for Asheville City Council. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I am Asheville native. I was born and raised here, so I've seen how the city has grown and changed around me. I spent a while working in a bunch of different jobs in service and in restaurants and retail. Construction labor. I was even a traffic flagger for a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was not the most fun job. But and then I decided to go to college. I went to NC State University and got a degree in civil engineering. And I worked at an engineering firm for a while where we designed roadways, intersections, and railways. Then I worked at the NC Department of Transportation where we oversaw contracts for big highway projects. And now in Asheville, I work as a project manager for a local renovation and remodeling company. So we're a pretty small company. We're living wage certified, and I work as a project manager there. So that's a little bit about me. Yeah. And I'd say, to answer your question about why I wanted to run, it's perfect that I'm on this show about the real estate market, because the thing that really motivated me the most was affordable housing. When we moved, my wife Emily and I moved back here from Raleigh, and the rents had just skyrocketed in the short few years that we were back. And we were thinking, like, how are we going to afford to save up for a down payment here with these rising rents? How are we going to afford to, like, have some savings and financial security? So that's what really motivated me to step in and try to do something about it.
Yeah, awesome. I know I was reading on your website, which is a great website, by the way.
Thank you.
About 3 years, you went from paying, I think it was $700 to like $1,100 for like a comparable. It was a one bedroom, right?
Yeah.
As far as your story goes, so that's a jump. I think
it
anybody
sure
who lives here, who's been living here, can appreciate that and relate to that story in some way or the other. Since you grew up here, I was just wondering if there's like any specific story or memory that you have from growing up here that kind of would show Asheville in a different light than what it is today. I don't know if it's going too far back or if that's too hard to pick, but curious to know. I always like to ask that of people who are, grew up here or are from the Asheville area, because I moved here since 2009, so don't have the depth of the context.
Gotcha. Let me really take a trip down memory lane.
And if there's
that's a tough one.
Fair enough. Let's keep rolling on it. So let's start with affordable housing. I saw on your website you're talking about, and I imagine it'd be super controversial. I'd love to know kind of what feedback you've gotten so far about allowing mobile homes to be put up here in the inside of Asheville city limits. Very curious about this on a personal level, because I love mobile homes. It's one of the primary areas where we invest in and rent out, just because they're a really good piece to the puzzle, especially here. So how did you arrive to that conclusion, and do you really think would ever get passed?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a bunch of places around Asheville, and one of those that I lived for a few years was a mobile home. It was one of the very old, crappy ones with terrible insulation.
Yeah.
And so the good news is that the new ones, they're called manufactured homes now, because they're set on a permanent foundation and not on wheels. The new ones are built to modern standards. They're a solid house. They're well insulated and energy efficient, and they're significantly cheaper than a site-built house. So I think it's really part of the affordable housing puzzle that gets left out a little bit. And recently, Buncombe County actually legalized manufactured homes in most of the county. So up until, I think it was last year, they were only legal in certain parts, but then they relaxed those restrictions, and now they're legal everywhere in Buncombe County that's not in the city. So I think Asheville needs to follow those steps as well, because it's definitely a part of the affordable housing puzzle that it's kind of banned for these outdated reasons. And now that the newer manufactured homes are built to a lot higher standards than the old ones, and I think it's time to bring them back.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We think that mobile homes, for what they are, when you're talking about affordable housing, not only from buying a place that's yours, but also renting something.
Yeah.
Anybody who's on our side of the table, like as an investor or as a landlord, the numbers make a lot more sense to be able to offer a unit out at affordable housing rates, to meet AMI standards, when you're spending, $40,000 to $50,000 on a house versus $150,000 on a house. You don't have the same pressure to get as much as you can for it. What other initiatives are you seeing from the affordable housing perspective that you're excited about, or that you're really wanting to push?
Yeah. So have you heard of the Bowen Report?
The Bowen Report?
Yes.
I believe I have.
Okay, well, this is a report that came out last September, and it was a big study that they did about our housing needs and the status of our housing market and affordability in Buncombe County. And so it has a lot of really great takeaways. I'd just like to dive into that a little bit right now. And it's kind of like, we hear from our friends and neighbors about the affordable housing crisis that we have, but it helps to put some good hard numbers to it as well.
Yeah.
So right now, as of this study, and that was in September, rent growth averaged about 5% a year since 2014. So about 5% a year for the last 5 years. That means, for example, somewhere that was $1,000 a month 5 years ago would now be about $1,270 in 5 years. That's the kind of rent increase that people are facing on an average basis in the county. And another key takeaway was that the median sales price of a home was about $315,000, and that's rising about $20,000 per year. So that's a big jump for people who are trying to save up down payments that keeps getting higher and higher every year. And another really big takeaway was that we're building a ton of apartments.
They are being built everywhere, it seems like. Yep.
But it's not really doing anything to slow down the rising prices. So typically the free market logic is that the more of something you build, the price goes down. Yeah. Simple supply and demand. But that doesn't seem to be happening with our housing market. And we're building a lot of housing that's for higher income, higher rent. And the biggest gap is the low income affordable housing, of course. And city initiatives have done some things there, but still, the point I'm getting to with this very long comment is that the biggest need is for deeply affordable housing for people who are on fixed incomes like Social Security, disability, people who are currently at risk of being homeless. And that's some of the places where we need to step in and take some action.
Yeah, and so when you're saying deeply affordable income, I'm wondering, are you talking about falling below that 30% AMI, so you want to be more aggressive than that, or is that kind of the standard?
Yeah, 30% AMI is about the standard we're aiming for.
And so going into that, what sort of role do you think city council can play to get there and to be a solution? Because I know, we've had the mayor on the show twice now.
Okay.
And both times we feel, walking away, that there feels like there's a concerted effort to do so, to be part of the solution, but it seems like a lot of the good ideas don't pan out to be as good once you kind of get into the nitty-gritty and the numbers. Have you run into that at all, on how to get there, and what do you think is possible there, I guess, to get around it?
Absolutely. So the city's approach currently is really incentivizing private developers.
Right.
So for cost reasons, they're working mostly on incentivizing people who are around 80% of AMI. By the way, I don't know if we've defined AMI, but that's the area median income, which I think is about $43,000 or something around there.
Yeah, it's right in the 40s.
So we're incentivizing people at about 80% of area median income, which is maybe around $35,000 per year. So that's where the main focus of the city's efforts have been, and that's what's got a lot of built, and that's really helpful for our community. And I think in order to really be able to build this deeply affordable housing that I'm talking about for people who make very little money, we got to think of some more radical solutions. And one of those solutions is the city acting as its own developer instead of incentivizing private developers. And this is something that we've done before in what's now pretty poorly regarded as public housing. And we have the power to do it. We have the legal authority to do it. We have a great way to resource the funds through bonds at low interest rates because we have a great bond rating. And we can look at how they're managed. We don't have to hand them over to the Affordable Housing Authority like they have been in the past. We could explore other options like tenant co-ops, for example.
Gotcha. Very cool. Before we move on off of affordable housing, do you have anything else? Or if not, I kind of wanted to start talking a little bit transportation, which I personally feel like is arguably just as big of a piece of the puzzle. But anything else on affordable housing before we move on?
Yeah, definitely just a few comments I'd like to make.
Yeah.
So another big thing that we have to focus on is not just rental assistance and rental housing, but incentivizing homeownership and removing barriers to homeownership. So we had a great start in that in the Downpayment assistance program that was rolled out last year. Have you guys heard about that?
Yeah, we their names are escaping me right now at the moment, but we had both of them on the show and talked about that at depth as far as the resources that they're rolling out. Todd and Nikki.
Great.
They're super informative episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a great, really promising program. It could certainly help me in a few years. I'd love to expand it to help other people. And some more options we have to remove barriers to homeownership are keep working on the the community land trust program, and the legalizing manufactured homes in the city will help with that as well.
Yeah. Are you coming from the belief then, just a strong belief that the home ownership is the kind of the instigator to get everything going from affordability and help people get into affordable housing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just the number one way to build wealth in our country is to own a home, and Asheville is particularly actually bad for this because we're about 50-50 homeowners and renters, and the nationwide average is more like 2/3 homeowners, 1/3 renters. So, the more equity that people are building, the better for them.
Gotcha. So you referenced, I don't know, I'm a renter. It sounds like you're still renting as well.
Yes, that's correct.
So personally, for whatever it's worth, just to offer the flip side, I actually believe that home ownership, if you're not careful, can stunt your ability to grow wealth. And we talked about this with Todd and Nikki. It was like, if somebody gets into a house, like, might not be a terrible example, but it's lining up. Like a pet and a house are similar, right? Like buying a pet or buying a house is arguably cheaper than maintaining a house or maintaining a pet, right? So like once you get into the house, just because you can afford the payments doesn't necessarily mean you can afford a house. And so for whatever that's worth, I always think it's important to point out that like houses need things over time, and those needs can be quite expensive. And being able to save up for a down payment can be very important as indicative to be able to save for the bigger ticket items that houses are going to need over time. So,
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. I work in the renovation and repair industry and construction, so I have to break this news to people all the time. So,
right? Yeah, it's like,
I hear you.
How much is that? Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Cool. Well, let's talk transportation then. Context-wise, I grew up in Bogota, Colombia, big city, 8 million people. So grew up on public transportation my whole life. Big fan of it. And I lived in Chicago for a little bit as well. They've got a great public transportation system there. And then coming to Asheville, when I first got here, I had to like hitchhike everywhere. And then I was on a moped and like bumming rides. It's really hard to get around here without a car. So what are you viewing as possible solutions, or at least like baby steps in that direction to make it a more quote unquote walkable city, I guess?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really think that we need to be a city where you don't need a car to get around, and I feel pretty strongly about that. And so number one is expanding our bus system. So we had a big battle last year at City Hall about the budget, whether it was going to include more funding for the bus system so that we could extend hours for transit or not. And it ended up that we did not do that last year. And it's looking like we might not extend those hours again this year. So when I'm on city council, I'm definitely going to commit to funding our transit master plan, which is kind of the vision for how our transit system is going to work in the future. And we're going to make sure that we have bus system hours that work for the people who need it. So when people are getting off work at 9 or 10 at a restaurant, they need a way home, because there's a lot of people who they can catch the bus to work, they have to find another way home at night, and that's
that's super helpful.
It's a problem. It's
Yeah.
not working for the people who need it most.
If we get those hours extended, do you think that's going to be enough to kind of, I don't know, get us to a plateau at least and be like, okay, we're at least good here for a couple of years, months, et cetera, and then focus elsewhere? Or do you think there needs to be more widespread changes or improvements?
Yes, there's certainly, that's one part of a multifaceted strategy. Another big change we have coming up is fare-free transit. So this is something that...
I've not heard about this.
Okay. County Commissioner Brownie Newman has proposed that the county is going to pitch in some funding for our transit system, and this funding is going to cover removing fares from our transit system. So we actually had a little experiment about this a few years ago. Right now, it's $1 fare to get on the bus, and monthly passes are cheaper, but it's $1 if you just show up. They took away that fare for a couple weeks a while back, and it boosted the ridership by about 50% just by removing the $1 fee. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And another great thing about the fare-free transit is that it increases efficiency. So I experienced this in Raleigh. When there's a packed bus and there's like 20 people getting on a bus stop, if each one of them has to pay and get the correct change, get it in meter, you're sitting there at that stop for minutes, versus if you just hop on, it's free. You're stopped there for a significantly shorter period of time. It decreases the bus's transit time and gets you to work on time faster.
If I don't know the city budget well at all,
Yeah.
I've just heard that the transit system is running in a deficit as it is now.
Yeah.
So if we go to fare-free, how does that work, or what are the economies around that to make that sustainable?
Totally. So, the fares right now, they pay for a very small fraction of the bus system. I think it's like 12%.
Okay. So it wouldn't be
Yeah.
significant change to
It's a small change.
Yeah.
And the county has actually proposed to cover this cost.
Okay.
So it's actually already taken care of, this particular change that I'm talking about.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Well, transportation-wise, any last comments on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've talked about buses.
Yep.
We also need to talk about everything else. So this is another thing that kind of slips under most people's radar, but Asheville is consistently one of the top most dangerous cities for pedestrians, for drivers, and for cyclists. We just saw a pedestrian right down the road on Smoky Park Highway just a couple days ago was killed, and that's really common in Asheville because we have a lot of places that don't have crosswalks. We have a lot of places that don't have like pedestrian signals and sidewalks, and that's a part of my plan as well. We got to fill in the gaps in our pedestrian network to make things safer for everyone.
What is the decision-making process on like deciding where crosswalks go? I mean, I would imagine maybe you know that some of your like work history. It sounds like you did work that's probably came up, but how do you, or is it just like somebody's like, oh, I know this part of town well. In my opinion, one should go there.
Yeah. So the Department of Transportation does. They prioritize which ones to do first by the dangers of it. Like, has there been crashes here reported in the past? Is there a lot of traffic here? But when it comes to pedestrians, those numbers are a lot harder to come by because with cars you can measure how many cars are crossing a road with those little meters. But with pedestrians you can't really do that unless you have someone like watching. By the way, we do pedestrian traffic counts once a year here. I volunteered for that last year. You just sit there and count people for 2 hours. But
so that's just the decision is kind of compiling all this data. And
it's prioritization, and it's also complaint based. Was there an incident here? Have people complained that it's dangerous? And so we actually, during this campaign, I've actually been able to help someone with that, which is really fortunate. I had someone come up to me after a speech. She's vision impaired, and she asked me if we could get audible crosswalk signals at an intersection that she uses all the time, because it's really hard to navigate with all the noises and you don't really know which way you're going.
Right.
So it's the intersection of Biltmore and South Charlotte Street. It's a pretty big, scary intersection, right? And if you can't see, then you're just kind of hoping that you're you got to be able to read the pavement markings with your with the stick. It's tough. So because I know how to use this system, I've been there. We actually found the right person to talk to, and we got the DOT to commit to build those audible pedestrian signals.
That's awesome. That's a big win.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was definitely
that's exciting. Yeah.
That was really, that's been the highlight of the campaign so far, honestly. It's because this person said that it was going to help their mobility and independence a lot. So I'm really glad we were able to get that done.
So I wanted to switch to talking about short-term rentals.
Yeah.
It's not as big of a hot button topic this election period. It doesn't seem like as it was that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where it was kind of on the tip of everybody's tongue. But I know there's a lot of people who they're pretty anti short-term rentals, right? Because they're like, feels like it's pushing people out, or just changing the fabric of communities and things like that. But we had somebody on the show, and they actually have to come on and be anonymous because of where they're living. But they live in West Asheville, and the only reason that they could afford their house is because of the homestay program. And they were just talking about how they wish that there's less restrictions around short-term rentals, and it would probably help affordability. Have you had conversations with people as you're going out in this campaign, and has this come up at all, or do you have any thoughts around it?
Yeah, surprisingly, that has not actually come up when I've been talking to voters.
Right.
Which is, it is very surprising because the last election cycle, that was a huge deal.
Everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there's, this is a tough issue. There's two sides to it, of course. Like you said, it's helping to pay off people's mortgages, and it seems like a liberty issue. But then there's the other side where if a full house is rented out for the short-term rental, it's taking a house off of the market. It's taking a long-term rental off of the market, and it's kind of creating a different sense of community in a neighborhood. When people live in a neighborhood, they're expecting to have a community there, a long-term investment, rather than people who are coming in and out every few days and who don't really who may not be good stewards of the community because of that, since they're just vacationing there. So it's a tough issue, and I think that the regulations we have on it are reasonable, and I think that we're not being too restrictive, and that's kind of evidenced by the fact that we're in the top 2 or 3 cities nationwide in terms of density of short-term rentals.
Well, if you do get elected, one thing that we've heard, and I think it'd be worth exploring a little bit more, is allowing people at ADUs to have those be for them to be short-term rentals without restrictions. Because right now, if you have an ADU, right, you can't short-term rental it out because it wouldn't fit the criteria for the homestay program. So just throwing that nugget out there for for conversation and whatnot, because I think it is if you could buy a house and you knew you could cover your mortgage payment because you had a short-term rental in the ADU and you were still living on site, I think it's kind of the best of both worlds, and in a sense it could be a good piece to the puzzle. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, Shane, is there anything else? I know you're probably running on a lot of other issues in the 3 we kind of talked about. Wanted to give you a couple moments to just hit on anything else that's particularly important or exciting to you, and just share your vision for it.
Thank you. I guess the first thing is vote for me on March 3. That's when the primary is.
Yeah.
You can choose your top 3 city council candidates. And so we've talked about transportation, about housing, and I'll just briefly touch on the other issues on my platform. So something I'm really passionate about is protecting our natural environment so that it can continue to protect us. So I'm sure we're all aware that we're in a climate crisis right now that's worldwide. And the UN scientists have told us that we have until 2030 to really drastically reduce our carbon emissions if we want to avoid the worst effects of the climate crisis. So I have a platform to do that by increasing energy efficiency in buildings, including helping low-income people with their energy bills and weatherization, building local renewable power, and protecting our tree canopy so that it can continue to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis for us. And another part of my platform is the impacts of tourism. So this is another really hot topic here.
Yes, it is.
We've really seen just a really, really fast-growing, exponential growth of hotels lately in the last few years. They're just we've gone from I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it seems like it's.
I remember just
tripled.
a couple of years ago, and it was like only the Cambria was downtown, right? As far as like the new wave, that was like the first one, and now, it seems like that's an old timer now.
Yeah, right. It's been there a while. So City Council recently pumped the brakes on that with a hotel moratorium that banned new hotel applications for a year. In the meantime, the ones that have been approved are still going up, so we're still getting more growth in hotel rooms. And I think there's some good reasons to really look at, we need to regulate this industry a little more and make sure it's working for our citizens and not the other way around. And one piece of evidence that points towards that is our living wage certification. So we have a living wage certification program here. It's voluntary. Our businesses can opt into it and tell people that they are paying living wage. There's only one major hotel that does that. Compare that to about 60 construction businesses, a ton of financial, retail, food service. But there's only one major hotel that's done that, and there's a few other bed and breakfasts.
Do you want to give them a shout out?
I actually don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I wish I could.
Yeah, no, wow. All the other hotels need to catch up then, huh?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
crazy.
So we really need to do a lot more to attract businesses here that are paying better wages. And yeah.
With the tourism thing, we had Stephanie Brown, who's the president and CEO of Explore Asheville, or the TDA, and we walked away with a very positive feeling about the work that they're doing. And
yeah.
I know that there's a lot of, I don't know if the right word is misconception, but there's just this belief, I guess, that they're the ones who get to choose how and where to spend the money. And I think that people need to be aware of that. A lot of that's kind of state mandated, and it's not necessarily that they kind of have free reign on how and where. How do you think that the city can work better with them, and work through and navigate the regulations that they have to do a lot of good infrastructure projects that they have the ability to do?
Yeah, great question. So for some context, we have something called the Tourism Development Authority here, the TDA. They collect an occupancy tax on hotel stays, and that tax accounted for, I believe, $24 million last year. So 75% of that money, they are mandated by law to put back into advertising. So we spend about $18 million tax dollars on advertising for more tourism each year. And the other $6 million goes towards local projects that are going to increase hotel stays. So we've seen that put into things like parks, like cultural centers. And there's a big feeling that we need to shift that balance and get more of that fund to go into local projects. And like you said, it is a state law that does that. And we have several state candidates who are running on the message that they want to go ahead and change that state law.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah.
I was unaware of that. It's great news. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's, it's definitely not set in stone. Whether it's changed has a lot to do with whether our local TDA supports the change and whether our local representatives support the change. And I think we have some I haven't heard anything about candidates from the Republican side who want to change this occupancy tax, but the candidates on the Democratic side are saying that they want to change it to favor more spending on our local city rather than advertising.
So changing the 75-25 split?
Correct.
Okay, very cool. Shane, yeah, thank you for that. That was some really good nuggets there. Anything else? Parting words? As far as why people should consider you, how do people get in contact with you, et cetera?
Yes, thank you. So one last thing. Tomorrow, I'm sorry, is this going to be...
This is going to come out in, I don't know, probably middle to end of February, so.
Okay. So remember, you can early vote.
Yes. And that starts, is it March 3rd? That's when the primaries
The primaries
end,
on March 3rd. You can early vote 13th. Starting in the middle of February.
Yeah.
And you can find me at mccarthy4avl.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at mccarthy4avl. And I would love to hear from you. Please get on my website. Give me a shout if there's any issues that you want to talk about. And I hope I have you vote on March 3rd.
Cool. And by the way, really enjoyed your website, so good work putting that together.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, guys. There you have it. Another episode here with Shane. Good information. Most importantly, get out there and vote. Make your voices heard. And we'll see you guys all next week. Take care.